Hello and welcome to the Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike DeLuke, and it's my mission to help you lead a happier, healthier, and more prosperous life, both personally and professionally. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike DeLuke, and I'm honored to have Dr. Rael Bernstein with me as today's guest on the show. Rael is an amazing orthodontist who practices in Northern California, where he owns and operates a private group of 11 orthodontic practices. He obtained his certificate of proficiency in orthodontics from SUNY Buffalo in 1998, and afterwards completed a fellowship in early treatment. He's an early adopter of passive self-ligation for use in phase 1 treatment and developed and patented the Bernie Brace early treatment system for use in phase 1 cases. Rael has taught at numerous orthodontic departments over the years, including UOP, UNLV, and UCLA. He continues to share his knowledge and skill with his colleagues at programs around the country, and most recently presented at the Pitts World Masters Symposium in Dallas. So with that, I would like to welcome Rael to the show. Rael, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you. And I'm really excited to just kind of dive into some issues on really hot button issues now in our profession on phase 1 and early expansion and how you do it. And we share some things in common, some not. We'll talk a little bit on the airway side of things as well. But before we start diving into that side, just tell me a little bit more about you and your family life and what you do kind of for fun and leisure outside of practice.
Yeah. Well, I'm married over 20 years and got 2 teenage girls, so I'm just trying to hang on for dear life at this point. Practice is good. I practice orthodontics. Contrary to popular belief, I actually love clinical practice, and I practice 3 to 4 days a week, as I've done my whole career. Wow. Can think of nothing better to do. I love orthodontics. I love teaching orthodontics and sharing what we do. So it's a pleasure to be on your show, so we can share what we do. I like personally, I'm a failed professional rugby player, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Well, that sounds
I'm from South Africa originally, so that's where the accent's from. And rugby is our national sport. So grew up playing rugby, and played it through college, and still watch and enjoy all kinds of sports. I'm getting ready for the Super Bowl this weekend, so go Niners. Yes. Should have worn my Niners jersey.
Yes.
I just like to stay active, work out, and just, like we're all trying to do, is find the right work-life balance, especially with larger, maybe successful practices, and, just having balance of spending time with the family. And, we like to travel together and see new places. I like, I don't want to miss any of my kids' theater performances or basketball games, and but still want to be there for your patients and for your staff, and for your teams. So that's the perennial endeavor in orthodontics, and of course trying to be a better orthodontist every day. So every day better is my motto.
Love
Just
it.
trying one step at a time.
Love it. Yeah. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to fit all those things in. And I give you a tremendous amount of credit for doing all that and having 11 practices. It's mind-boggling, probably to most of us out there, myself included. I will say on the football side, so this is going to air a few days after the Super Bowl, so we'll know if your prediction, we'll know the weekend you had. And as an unfortunate Cowboys fan from upstate New York, sad to say I'm a Cowboys fan. But it's not easy. But at this point, it's just kind of a glutton for punishment, I suppose. But I don't really obviously have any much liking for the 49ers, although I got to say, there's, Purdy, these guys, there's a couple of them now. I'm and McCaffrey, they're solid dudes. So it's, I don't hate them as much as I usually do. I guess and the Cowboys, I don't really have much to say positive about that.
Well, I guess that's a good thing. We love the 49ers, So
no, absolutely. So tell me, how did you get to this stage in your career where you have 11 practices. I mean, you've been practicing, it sounds like you're about 5-ish years ahead of me, 5-6 years ahead of me. So, I mean, that's a heck of an accomplishment to achieve. How did it happen? I mean, did you start it one from scratch? Did you buy out a group? Did you buy out another doc?
No, actually, no. My story is kind of interesting. I finished my residency and moved out to California and associated down in Southern California.
Okay.
A lot of the opportunities that were kind of presented at the time diminished and evaporated. It was at the time of the 99.com bubble burst.
Bubble
And,
burst. Yeah, sure.
there was
Yeah.
a bunch of
Yep.
practices that were transitioning and all of a sudden didn't transition. I think a lot of guys a lot of people got a little bit burnt on their retirement plans
Yep.
and had to keep working.
Yep.
And so, the opportunities were few and far between back then. I ended up moving up to Northern California and starting a practice from scratch, actually.
Wow.
I was talking to a dentist one day. I'd taken a couple of corporate jobs to pay the bills, and and thank goodness they were there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you learn from every endeavor you get into, right?
Sure.
So you almost learn sometimes what not to do is just as valuable as what to do. So I try to take the lessons from that. And kind of rented out one chair in a dental office. And the dental office had hygienists that finished work at 3, and they said, well, the chair is available after 3, so
wow,
make an office. And so those are the only opportunities that I actually had at the time.
Wow.
There were no practices, there were no associateships, there was nothing. And so we had to work hard and just go at it and really make it work. And so I did, and again, learning a lot of lessons from those early days. I'd work at the corporate job and then come work in the office in the evenings, run here and drive here. I was driving 2 hours one way and 2 hours the other way to go to work. So again, not necessarily any harder than anyone else works. I think we get a little bit spoiled in our profession. We get a lot spoiled. So, I didn't know any better and just did what I had to do to get this practice off the ground. Was, really supportive, the community that we were in, and we're just trying to take care of everyone. And I had all of one employee for a long time. And then my whole staff resigned. And that was my one employee.
There you go.
So I had to learn how to do everything.
Yep.
Every position. So I did everything, from janitor to orthodontist to receptionist to billing to sterilizing.
Yep.
So those are interesting days. Anyway, so I kept my head down and worked hard. Ultimately, people used to ask me, because we grew that startup practice. I guess I'm in the land of startup, right? in Northern California. And then about a year and a half later, actually built out our first office. And I actually physically built some of it, or I did the demolition of this building, and the roof almost caved in on me. So we learned that we'll leave construction to the experts.
Valuable lesson.
And just kept working hard at taking care of patients. And people would ask me at meetings, or colleagues, like, oh, what's the secret, or the marketing and whatnot? And I said, well, it's the marketing is just part of what you have to do. But the best marketing is take care of the patients, right? Really take care of what's important to them.
So true.
That's the best marketing you can. And of course, everything you do is marketing. So, you can't just nail one thing and say, oh, this is the best marketing thing. It's a combination of everything.
Yeah. And internal marketing, I think, is one of the most overlooked and I don't mean internal marketing like PlayStations in the reception room.
No gimmicks.
Those are gimmicks, and not that you don't have them, and I had them, but the point is internal marketing, exactly what you said, taking care of the patient. There's no better marketing out there, and it stands the test of time. And I know people say now that it's not the same, and with social media and advertising, and I agree, things have changed, but that formula is tried and true.
Well, it's the core of what we do, right? And so we've got to be good at that, all right, and really focus on it. And then, of course, you can't ignore all the other things. You got to still do all the other things, because you can't ignore it. And a lot of people get kind of caught up in the gimmicks and the mumbo
Yep.
jumbo of
Yep.
everything else. So we've always just tried to focus on that. And are we perfect? We try to be perfect every time, but we're humans just like anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So we just at least try to be better every day. And that's what we try and do. So I grew that practice, and it grew pretty large. I opened up a satellite. It seemed that was like the thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
Yep.
I kind of I was listening to the consultants and the experts, and we
Yep.
had pretty much every consultant come through the office to help us with this and for that. And orthodontists, we train business on the fly, which is
Yes.
kind of the worst way to do it.
Yep.
I wish I'd learned business and I'd learned management
Mm-hmm.
as I was going through orthodontics, but I had an orthodontist up in upstate New York, one of the attending faculty, and he'd give us a course a little bit on marketing, and he gave us this little handbook, which was like my Bible at the time to get my practice going. And I've spoken at his study clubs now, and we're good friends.
That's
But
great.
it was thanks to people like that helped me in my career outside of knowing where to put the bracket, right? And so I've always looked for givers that give of their information, that share openly, for the sake of sharing, not because there's something in it for them,
right?
But just because they enjoy doing that, and it gives them fulfillment. And so I try and do the same, of course, with the associates that work with me, with the residents that we teach, the lectures that we give. Always willing to share with our colleagues, so we can kind of all get better together.
That's a huge part of it.
Yeah, I think so. And most in our profession, I think, are like that.
I agree.
I've met a lot like
Yep.
yourself, and others that are really are givers. And one of my mentors, Dr. Tom Pitts, who I follow, and who helped me when I was in the fledgling of my career. I would drive over to Reno and sit at the chair side and try and take in of like, what's a practice supposed to look like? I didn't even know what a treatment coordinator was at the time. Wow. And then I kind of ventured off to looking at what they were doing in the clinic, and I was like, wow, no one taught me this stuff in school.
Yes, and I'll come back to that about
yeah,
in our discussion
we can get back to that.
Yeah.
But so people like that were just always willing to share and help. And the whole, back then was the Damon camp, and those guys would really help a lot with the young startup orthodontists who didn't know much about this whole system that we were doing, and we learned. So so the practice thrived and flourished, and it got really, really busy. It was it was growing, and as you've had a big thriving standalone practice, it pulls you in every kind of direction.
Oh, it does.
And we were starting a family at the time, had little kids, and I found like I was at the office until late at night dealing with something, some HR thing, or reviews, or charts, or leases, or whatever it was. The stuff was just driving me crazy. And I said, okay, fine, I had to get back more into balance, into kind of a work-life balance. And so
about how far in your career would you say this was? About how many years into your orthodontic
probably
career?
about 8.
About 8. Okay.
Years
in. Yep. Okay.
About maybe 9, closer to 10.
Okay.
And some into the career or into my practice, because I
into your time that you were kind of, how long you've been working at the practice when you felt it get to that point where it was all encompassing?
Yeah, I think at the practice, probably about 8 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. And so, it was slow going. Well, it didn't happen overnight.
No.
And
but when it happens,
I read about
all of a sudden
businesses,
you have it happens, and then you're like, whoa, this is like, it's like you're just driving along and you're speeding up, like you're on the highway and they think it's good. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I'm going faster than I thought I was going right now. And like you said, all these other things are racing by, all your other commitments. I think that's one of the biggest challenges I found in building a big practice that gets very, very popular and in high demand is it's hard to know when to stay in that sweet spot. It's hard to know when to be like, oh, or get associates or start to get help, which sounds like the avenue you went. But I think so many of us get to the point where we feel that overwhelming feeling and then go to take action. And I don't know, maybe it's human nature, maybe that's just the way it is, but it'd be really neat if we could figure out or help others to figure out, hey, like when you're here, this is the point that you should do that. So yeah, so continue with you started feeling that
Yeah, and I
things
think
were
it's
going
different.
fast and
A good point to bring up, because I think it's different for everyone. You know, some
Mhm.
people kind of think they're at that point, and I've spoken to a lot of orthodontists because a lot of people will ask me these questions,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'll say, okay, so why do you want to bring in an associate?
Mhm.
What's the issues? You know, let's
Yep.
figure out the why first,
Yep.
and then figure out the solution versus just jumping to another solution. All right.
Yep.
And
Which can have its
sometimes
own problems too.
that's not the answer. The
Yeah.
answer is some efficiency thing or some insurance thing, whatever
Yep.
it is. But
Yep.
you know, but anyway, so for me, again, not knowing much, decided to kind of outsource some of that stuff,
Okay.
some of the business functions that you know, not my favorite thing. You know,
Yep.
I really love orthodontics, and I
Yep.
like clinical practice. I like talking to patients and parents, and
Yep.
that's the lane I like to stay in.
Yeah.
And so I try to outsource a lot of the business functions, and that was a disaster, absolute disaster.
Mm.
It took the issues I was having and the time that it took me, and it doubled it,
Mm.
and it was supposed to make it better. And
Yeah.
so then I had to kind of reflect and think, okay, how can we do this?
Hey, everybody, be sure to check out the Doc website where you can get access to tons of great information, including free educational content, access to private one-on-one coaching with me, ADA CERP recognized CE courses, and amazing patient testimonials. Just go to theorthocoach.com. That's theorthocoach.com. And now back to today's episode.
I can either, you know, minimize what I'm doing, cut back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can raise your fees and
Mm-hmm.
help fewer people.
Yep. Yep.
You probably make more money.
Yep.
But you know, for me, it wasn't about that. It's about, you know, why I got into this in the first place was to help people
Yeah.
and help more people, and not say no to people. Try and help them. And so I decided to grow my own group for a number of reasons. One is so we could have coverage for each
Mm-hmm.
other, the
Mm-hmm.
orthodontists.
Yep.
I could have my own, you know, kind of not a temp agency, but if some people called in sick, we had a larger group of pool of employees to pull from.
Yep.
And then we could also hire as a group, you know, business people, management people that were good in their own right to take care of the things that I didn't want to necessarily deal with, so that I could go home at, you know, 5:30 and be with my family, which was somewhat of a little selfish thing, I guess, if you
Sure,
think
but
about it.
very important. Yeah.
But that's kind of how I went down this path of developing a group. So we acquired some practices. We started de novo some other practices, you know, and so that's kind of what would led us
Wow.
up to now. Yeah. So
Very cool.
yeah.
It's such a great story. And I love in doing the podcast. I love speaking with just people in general, learning their stories. I think it's fascinating just to hear people see where people are at. And I know I can speak personally, you know, people didn't know that where my practice had grown to. People in the community who, you know, the kids I was treating weren't even alive when I started my practice. Their parents were kids, a lot of them, or young, very young. They didn't know that I went to over 100 general dental offices, knocking on doors, literally going in there with cards and brochures, because it was before you would do this stuff
What you
digitally,
did.
and
Yep.
literally just saying, "Hey, I'm Mike DeLuke. Nice to meet you. I'm the new guy in town." And you know, they would be like, "Wait, you what?" No, yeah, I literally,
Yeah.
you know, and I had times
Yeah.
I, you know, was treated terribly by front office people, and you know, so it's I love the stories that encapsulate the grind, because so few people get to where you're at without the grind. And I think one of the things that's really awesome, and one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on, is when we've spoken, it's clear that your focus has remained the patient through and through, and the focus has been on the patient. And I find very few people with whom I speak that, if that focus remains on delivering a quality experience and result to the patient, that their practices don't thrive. There's all these gimmicks, like we said before, there's all these other things you can do. Consultants will say all these different things, and have these debates of, is it same day starts? Is it this? Is it? But at the end of the day, if you are dependent, no matter what techniques you use, no matter what modalities, no matter whether you do early treatment or not, or Invisalign or not, if you care for your patients and they know it, and you focus on getting great results on your cases, it will take care of itself and you will have a busy, thriving practice. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree. I mean, that's as I said, the core of what we do,
Mm-hmm.
and so it should be,
Mm-hmm.
it's what we're trying to do.
Right. It's why we're doing
Um,
this. Right.
yeah, and but care goes beyond teeth, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we spoke about it when we first met up on the phone,
Yep.
in terms of kind of where my training was, and kind of how we look at things, and how things have kind of not gone full circle. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still there, but
Right.
really looking at kind of what we wanted to talk about in terms of actual care for the patient, which
Yeah.
includes the things you were talking about earlier in airway, and all the and everything else that's connected to to the mouth that we work in.
To that point, I love this. Let's get into kind of how you got into, I'll kind of put it out there for those who may not know. We both are big believers in the advantages of early treatment and what can be done to these young growing mouths. And a lot of people are aware of kind of how I got into that. And I want to focus on how you got there. I know you had said, and I let everyone know in the beginning, you did this sort of residency focus in early treatment. I'd love to hear more about that. And then how you, or I guess fellowship, it would be called fellowship in early treatment, what that really was. And then is that, I guess I should say it this way. Did you do the fellowship in early treatment because you had this inner instinct that that was important, or did you learn the value of early treatment through the fellowship?
Good question. So through our residency, our main, if you want to call it technique or philosophy that we followed, was bioprogressive.
Mm-hmm.
We were,
Oh,
upstate New
Ricketts.
York,
Yeah.
called
Yeah.
Gugino Land.
Yep. Gugino,
I had the
Ricketts,
privilege,
Hilgers, Bench. Yep. All of
yeah,
them.
I had
Yeah.
the
Yep.
actually privilege of meeting Ricketts, who came to our school. There's an actual picture I still have. It's
That's
all
awesome.
fuzzy
It's
and
a
grainy, and
legend.
I still
It's,
have hair,
yeah.
but
It's,
it was awesome. And that kind of resonated with me, because when we went through dental school in South Africa, which is where I did my dental school,
mm-hmm.
one of the very, very first lectures we had when we came into the clinics was from one of the one of our lecturers, and he said, listen, we're going to talk about teeth, and we're going to look for decay and root canals and whatever. He said, but I want you to never forget this. He said, when a patient walks into the room and you first meet them, that's when you want to start diagnosing what's going on with the situation. He said, you always start from the outside and go in.
Mm.
And funny, the Ricketts people and the bioprogressive people said the same thing. That,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. The
form function,
VTOs and form and function. Yeah. They were
form function.
pioneers in that. Yep.
Yeah, and so, however, the issue with that, when we started kind of delving into the technique in school, was these Ricketts retracted. We had to bend all this wire,
Oh, yeah.
alloy and everything else,
Yeah.
and it
Yep.
was
The
like
algae. Yeah. Oh,
cumbersome, and
yep.
it
Isn't it
just
036
wasn't.
algae, right? He used a lot of like the
Oh,
036 algae, and yeah, that's
all
yeah.
this kind of stuff. However,
Yep.
the early arch development with quad helices,
Yes, and W arches.
looking
Yep.
at tongue position, mandibular position,
Yep.
airway,
Breathing. Yeah, exactly. I
that
mean,
wasn't new.
people think
That's where
this is
that came
new.
from.
People think this is like this fringe fad thing that people are talking
Uh-uh.
about airway. I mean, I've spoken about it before, but I mean, there's articles going back to the early 1900s. I mean, you can quote literature back from 1913, and Holzman in 1928 had a whole synopsis in an AJO article, a great write up. About it. So it goes way beyond. I mean, even that was probably what 50 years preceding Ricketts and all of them, but it's not new. And I think it's such a great point you bring that up, that we've known that there are advantages to developing arches early and young. And I mean, Melvin Moss and the functional matrix, right? Enlow and his growth publications in the 60s, form and function, and the adaptability of our craniofacial complex and how that changes based on the environment. And I think the more that the craniofacial adaptation, that side of it, I think we study it, we talk about it a lot, we do a lot of lit reviews on it, we learn about it, but I feel like there's a disconnect between that and then we go into private practice and it's like we just focus. Residencies prepare us most for focusing on straightening teeth. And it's almost like there's still this disconnect between the two.
Yeah, well, there was, luckily for me, there wasn't as much a disconnect,
That's nice. Yeah.
and we had a lot of influence from the Europeans at the time, where,
Okay.
Herbst and,
Hmm.
who was those articles?
Panchairs and
Punchairs, yeah,
yep.
Punchairs. We read a lot of those articles,
Yep.
and so we that's kind of what we did. It was let's look at the face. Let's start our diagnosis from the outside in. Let's
Yep.
look at the function, and let's try and figure out why this looks the way it does,
Yep.
and then work backwards to figuring out what we should do about it.
Yep.
Versus let's just, how do we get these teeth as straight as fast as possible?
Right. Right.
You know,
Right.
and
Right.
but I also understand the dynamic of early treatment in terms of patient burnout, parent burnout, wallet
Hmm.
burnout.
Hmm.
There's a whole other side of early treatment that maybe we want to do it,
Yep.
and but therefore whatever factors, you just can't get to do it, and that's
Hmm.
okay too.
Yep.
However, I think a lot of the research that's coming out in terms of the cognitive development of children,
Yes. The
that if
neurocognitive
we can, if
implications. Yes.
and I'm not saying what we do is the panacea of fixing everything. Absolutely not. But
Correct. I agree.
how can having better function, better breathing, better airway hurt? I don't think that certainly can hurt anyone.
And how can
I think it
normalizing
helps.
arch development young when they're so pliable and you can use minimal force? And again, going back to 100 years ago when they were talking about actually doing this in the full primary dentition, not even in the early mixed dentition. Uh, in the orthodontic literature, there are many, many examples. I mean, even angle was big on the development and not, the whole Tweed angle debate that came about. And I mean,
Right.
this has been going on for a century, but the concept of growing younger faces with less force, hence the bioprogressive Ricketts using 300 grams of force, 300 to 400 grams with these quad helices, not putting these heavy RPEs in that you have to be cranking 2 times a day. So the concept's been there. We've known the science is sound. There've been many studies that prove that this works. As you said, and it's a great point, there's burnout, there's the financial side. I always found that when I was very up, I always tried to be, and I teach residents this all the time. You never lie to your patients and you never try to mislead them. You're upfront with them. You tell them pros and cons, what you see, and what the problems are. And what I find is, I feel like most residencies out there, sounds like you had a very different experience, which is awesome. But a lot of residencies, I'd even say the majority, very few of them ever treat any patient 7 years of age or younger at any point in dental school or their residency. And I ask residents this: how many have you treated? The average answer can be counted on one hand. Every now and again, you get someone who did a GPR or did some additional training, and they're an outlier with that. But the majority who just go through 4 years of dental school and a 3-year orthodontic residency come out of their orthodontic residency and have probably never treated more than a handful patients 7 years and under. And I think then they get into private practice, and a lot of what we learn about that just doesn't apply because they never did it. And I think that's why a lot of the GPs and pediatric dentists are a little more open to this, because a lot of them are used to treating 5, 6, 7-year-old kids. So it's not that big of a deal to them. Whereas us, if you don't know what you're doing, and we want to talk more about that, if you don't know what you're doing and have a good system for it, phase one can be really brutal on a kid, on a practice, on a parent. So tell me a little bit about somehow you did it to try and how you got to the point. I'll start by saying this: we both do it with braces and wires. As we talked leading, before this, we're on opposite coasts and literally we're living like this parallel practice life. We were chatting. We're like, wait, you do that too? Crazy. But I said, I'm like, I wonder how many people in between where the two of us were literally geographically are doing this as well. But using braces and wires, not using turnkey expanders. How did you start doing that, and kind of what prompted that? And then what did you start to see, and what have you seen in doing it that way?
So before I tell you that story,
Yep.
I'm not predicating that every 5-year-old needs an expander.
Thank you.
Absolutely not. And
Appreciate
every
saying that.
7 or
Yes.
8 or 10-year-old needs an expander.
Correct.
Absolutely want to be very conscious about overtreating. Right.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for saying that.
And so I see a lot of residencies that don't see any phase one, like
I
maybe
agree.
one patient.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind
Yep.
a like a younger kid,
Yep.
but even any kind of phase one, they just don't see those young kids, which is
Nope.
unfortunate. And
Mm-hmm.
so they don't get practice because it's different, a little bit different, working with younger kids
It
and their
is.
parents versus teenagers and their parents.
Yep.
It's a different dynamic. The
Yep.
parents, it's just a different behavioral pattern. So
Yes.
we have to get comfortable with that.
Yes.
But some of the most rewarding, as I'm sure you can agree, some of
Oh,
the most rewarding
I would even say some of, I would say
experiences in your
the
career.
most, I would say when
Yeah.
one of those little ones runs up to you and
Thank
hugs you because they know that you've done something that made them better. They can't even maybe verbalize it. And, or you see, a mom or I've had dads in tears, literally, because I was the only one who took the time to really understand what was going on with their child and some of the amazing impacts that happened as a result of getting them to the right medical professionals.
right.
And like you said, looking at them when they walk in the room, paying attention to allergic shiners and signs of atopy and mouth breathing and transverse deficiencies and insufficient tongue space and all of these things that when you are trained to see it, you can't unsee it. But when you're not looking for it, you can very easily overlook.
Easily miss it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If you don't ask and you don't see, you don't miss you miss it. So many times have I forgotten to ask, if a kid snores, just something small like that, and then I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, did they snore?
Mm-hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, I can predict, yeah, oh,
Yeah.
they're snoring.
Yeah.
Again, not saying that every type of expansion is the solution to everything. Of course not.
And on
But
that
but
point,
it
they
could be
might not
part of
need
it.
or benefit from expansion,
Yeah.
meaning exactly what you're just saying. I had a patient I saw with a resident last week, and I had just been giving them a talk on diagnosis and treatment planning and the importance of getting a history and background. And I'm with another resident in a bay right nearby, and I overhear mom and grandma explaining about this 10-year-old that she's snoring and mouth breathing and all of this. And I'm hearing this and I'm automatically in my head thinking, I'm like, this girl's arches are going to be that classic, V-shaped, narrow. She's going to have blocked out laterals, significant, moderate to severe crowding. As I'm listening to the fact that I walk over and her arches were so beautifully broad and her palate was so
Yeah.
perfect. And
Yeah.
she's a highly advanced dentition development. She had everything, all her permanent teeth were in except for her 12-year-old molars. She was a young 10. She turned 10 in December. So, and as we're
Yeah.
speaking here now, it's the beginning of February. So she was 10 years, 1 month at the point that I saw her. And I was like, looked in and I said to the resident, I said, Chris, I said, this is exactly why we don't have a one size fits all approach. This is exactly why we don't just look at someone who's snoring or mouth breathing and say, I can fix that as the orthodontist, or you need expansion. This girl had a level curve of Wilson. I mean, there was nothing I was going to do for her. She had a deep bite and eventually she'll need, comprehensive ortho, microdontic laterals. But from a airway perspective, nothing I was going to do was going to have an impact on her. So,
Well, you could have
except
impacted her by making a referral.
well, that's what I
So
was just
there's
going to
still
say,
impact to be
except
made.
from the clinical orthodontics. So the other part of the
Correct.
story is she went to an ENT, the resident did a great job getting this history, had just literally come from my lecture on it. So he did a great job asking about ENT allergy. And so turns out mom went to an ENT a while ago, like 4 years or something ago. They didn't really remember what they were told, and they've been seeing the allergist continually. The allergist has prescribed steroid nasal spray. Patient's not taking it. So we start getting in again into the
Yeah.
history. So what did I
Yeah.
do? To your point, I said, nothing I'm going to do orthodontically to her teeth is going to change this. However, I do feel we need to really emphasize, and I talked to the patient, the importance of using the spray. And I, asked her why she doesn't like it. And we talked about that and the importance of breathing through her nose. And the parents and mom and grandma said she's a restless sleeper. She struggles with her attention in school, all of these other neurocognitive issues. So I just kind of explained to them, like, we really want to get her so she's breathing through her nose and not snoring and sleeping well at night. And I really want you to make sure you stay going to the allergist, follow your allergist's instructions. And I do feel we need to send you back to an ENT or another ENT to take a deeper look into whether we
Yeah.
could be missing some lymphoid tissue or something. And they were so receptive to it. But
Yeah.
after she left, I said to the resident, I said, that is why you take the time to go through a thorough diagnosis for every single patient that walks in your door. And unfortunately in the hospital, they have cone beam, but it's only if they see like an impaction or something on a pan. They don't do cone beam up front on it. So I wasn't able to see that or give them any more information on that, which is fine. I was still able to understand
Right.
that, hey, look, like there's something going on with her airway and it's nothing that we can do. So when people come out and they start making these points that, oh, people who believe that orthodontics can impact airway, it's almost like they conflate that with people who just want to throw expanders and appliances into everybody and say they're solving sleep apnea. It's like that couldn't be further from the
No.
truth.
And
So
what you're doing for the patient, and what we hope we do for all our patients, is ultimately you're caring for the patient,
yes,
right? That's what we hit on initially, right?
yep,
And so their well-being and
yeah,
their growth and development,
yep,
and that's important. I think we have a role to play in that.
I agree.
Um, and it's an important role that I think a lot of us just kind of miss in the day to day of everything going on in our practices. The
Do you think it's
organized
just because we're
chaos that
so
is
busy?
orthodontics.
Because I agree with you, and that troubles me why we overlook it so often. Because your average orthodontist, I mean, is highly intelligent, very focused on minutia. I mean, small details. That's why a lot of us went into this. Very acutely aware of things going around them. Why do you think so many don't look at it?
I think we get caught up in the busyness, right,
Mhm.
of your day. And as
Yep.
a practitioner, if you're owning the business, you're
Hmm.
managing the business, you're doing the orthodontics, you're
Hmm.
head of marketing, head of HR,
Hmm.
you're head of admin, head of IT,
Hmm.
and you're the orthodontist. There's a lot of hats you have to wear in
For
a
sure.
private orthodontic practice. Believe me, I know.
Yeah,
And at
me too.
some point, those hats start falling off your head
Hmm.
somewhere,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so I think the way I practice now, even if I had one office, I would practice with the same management style, because when I come in, I can solely focus on my patients,
That's great.
and that's all I have to do.
Yeah.
And luckily we've developed the team to support us as orthodontists, so that they can take care of the management, and they can take care of the HR and the things like that. And and
Wow.
and
That's
and so
awesome.
I really like this way of practice, because I think my orthodontics, and the care, not just the orthodontics and the tooth and the class one, but the actual care we can give our patients, the
Yes.
time we can give them, is better,
Yeah.
at least for me, without all those distractions.
That yeah, I completely agree. 100, being in that position myself, I refused to sacrifice the care I gave my patients, and it took a lot out of me. I mean, it took a
Yeah,
lot
it
out. I
does.
mean, basically, what I compromised at that point was just sleep. It's just like,
Well, something, or
just
family
something, like you
time, or
said,
something.
something. A hat was going to
Yeah,
drop, and my hat
yeah.
was sleep. It was just like it was only so many hours, and I refused to not go through that process for each one of my patients.
No, most of us won't compromise, and
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
yeah,
And I think orthodontists by nature are really caring, and really, strive for excellence, for
yep,
sure.
agree. I
I
agree.
think our whole profession, and that's why we have these debates, and we openly share about our businesses and our practices, because we want us all to do better, for our collective patient pool, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Uh,
the communities basically that we serve.
Completely. So how
Yeah.
did you get into doing it with braces and wires, from
Okay. So
understanding that
yeah.
you had to do?
So
Did you learn
good
that at
question.
the fellowship, or is that something you just started trying?
No, so the fella, I stayed on and did an additional year after my residency, because I wanted. We didn't. We
This is
hadn't
at
treated
Buffalo
a lot
still?
of.
You're still at
Yeah, in
Buffalo?
Buffalo.
Okay.
Yeah, same place. I was
Okay.
kind of on faculty, and did some research, and helped teach. Worked in the faculty practice,
Yeah.
and wanted to do more phase one early treatment, because when I was a kid, I had early treatment.
Okay.
My early treatment was 5 years of a headgear.
Yeah.
So we won't
Uh-huh.
get into that.
Yep.
I didn't necessarily enjoy the process,
Yep.
but one of the reasons I became an orthodontist is because I really, really enjoyed what it did for me,
Mm.
right? At the time I didn't know it, but when I look back and look at when I started to do better at school and get it, I wasn't the last one picked on the sports team. I started actually getting into sports teams,
Hmm.
did better. I was kind of almost encouraged to put in more effort,
Hmm.
because I had this new confidence when I didn't have these big buck teeth, and
Interesting. Yeah.
maybe it was an age thing, or but there was a direct
Yeah.
correlation to when I finished that early orthodontics, that I just started to do better just in general,
About
came
what age
out of
would you
my
say?
shell a little bit.
What age
What's
would you
that?
say were? What age about were you then?
Must have been
Ish.
about 11, 10, 11.
Okay. Yep. So
Yeah.
see, still pre-adolescent. And
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it was, it wasn't like a light switch,
Yep.
but when I look back at it, I was like, well, when did I start actually putting in more effort and trying harder, and just in general do better. I had more friends, and I think it's the confidence thing.
Yeah, when you felt better about yourself, sure. Yeah.
And there's a obviously commonly used label statement that we don't save lives, but we certainly change lives with orthodontics, and absolutely I 100% agree with that. So many people were blessed and fortunate to impact in our careers.
That's true.
I tell everyone it's the best profession out there.
Yeah. Agreed. Have you heard about the doc community on Facebook? It's where you can get access to more great content, including case reviews, select clips from CE courses and podcasts, literature reviews, and exclusive promotions and discounts off doc educational materials. Just go to Facebook and search for the doc community and submit a request to join the group. And now back to the podcast.
Yeah, and so that was kind of done for me. I wasn't so thrilled about wearing this headgear. In fact, it was tied in at the time. I had to wear it to school because I didn't wear it.
Oh, wow. You got it tied in.
Whoa. I mean, I don't think anyone would willingly wear that headgear 24/7. But I still see people with headgears. I was at an airport a few years ago, and someone walked past me, a little kid with a headgear on it. And I was like, I had to take a double take. I was like, wow. I was impressed by the compliance, but I was like, wow.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm not ragging on headgears. I mean, myself personally, I wish I would have had maybe a Herbst instead of the headgear, so I wouldn't snore as much as I do. But and I'm still a little bit retrognathic, and perhaps that would have been a better option. But again, that's what we had at the time, and I'm absolutely not ragging on headgears. It's not what I'm doing. We're not ragging on expanders. But when I got out of residency, the way we were taught to deal with crowding, narrow arches, cross bites, phase one was to put in an expander and expand, and then 2x4s, right? Put in 2x4s. So whether it was
just upper, probably, right?
What's that?
Just upper expansion, probably, right?
Yeah, upper. I worked with a pediatric dentist in San Diego. Actually, he had done the pedo ortho program, so he'd done pedo and ortho, and we saw a lot of young kids in that practice. And I would see lower expansion, and I hadn't seen that in residency.
Yeah, right.
So
no, come out of ortho residency, like, wow, you're like, wait,
this kind of works. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and so
it really works.
Again, you're trying to learn something everywhere you go.
Agreed. Yep.
And so I was doing upper and lower expansion. And 2x4s. And the dentist, actually, the dentist.
Excuse me 1 second. Sorry to interrupt you on this. I want to be very clear, though, for the audience, because I've faced feedback from people when they hear lower expansion, they think we're saying we're expanding the mandible, and that is not the case. We know that the symphysis fuses around birth. We're not, it would take distraction osteogenesis to expand the mandible. We're talking about dental alveolar expansion and uprighting and arch development of a steep curve of Wilson or tipped-in teeth. So I just want to clarify that. Slow expansion, you're not turning this thing twice a day. If you're doing it with a turnkey, it's once a week type of thing. So anyway, so I just want to clarify that.
The pediatric dentist I worked with would do it with a lower kind of an RPE key expansion. What we had done in my residency, we'd use a bihelix on the lower. Doing it the Ricketts way. And again, it's slow arch development, uprighting and space maintenance basically on the lower, trying to keep the lower incisors, obviously upright, and just making space for teeth to erupt. I mean, how many times have you seen a teenager walk into your office with impacted canines that are wiping out the roots of the laterals and centrals, and you're like, I wish I would have seen this kid at, 8 or 9 or 7, so I could have made some space and maybe had some baby teeth removed so that these teeth could erupt. I think if you can manage the eruption from an early age and you see the issues, pediatric dentists are pretty usually good at this because they're looking for it. I think a lot of times our colleagues, they're also busy in their day-to-day, and they miss these things because they're not looking for it, right?
And when we don't do it in residency, that's the thing I find. If you're not trained to think this way, it's really, really hard to go to as much school as we go to, not be trained to think this way or see this way, and then walk into practice. When I started my own practice, the hardest thing that I had to do, and it happened to be the thing I saw the most of once I started from scratch with no patients, didn't buy anybody's patients. I literally, like you, I sublet from another guy. I had 3 chairs that he used that wasn't there the day, and the day that he wasn't there. And these patients started coming in, and they're 6, 7, 8-year-old kids with narrow arches, blocked out laterals, crowding. And I'm looking in there, no space for the tongue, just everything's caved in. And I'm looking in there going, well, I was taught like if they don't have a crossbite, they're not narrow. That's kind of the
Right.
mentality we have coming out of
Yeah.
residency. A lot of these kids didn't have posterior crossbites. And I'm going,
Yeah.
so I could start to just send this kid to get extractions, but something in me just felt like that's treating the symptom. That's not treating the etiology. This kid doesn't have macrodontia. These aren't big teeth. Sometimes they look big because these kids are small, but the teeth
Right.
themselves were not large. I said, why am I going to just start pulling these teeth? Why can't I grow more? And believe it or not, that's how I started, going back almost 20 years ago, 19 plus, looking into like, well, how can I help these young kids normalize the transverse, even in the absence of a posterior crossbite? And I started with the Schwartz appliance, and there's a ton of literature on it. It was put out in the mid 60s by Schwartz, and I think Gratzinger was who he did the first publication on it with. In the mid 60s. And it's been studied extensively since that you can get stable, long-term stable dental alveolar expansion of the mandibular arch. So I started researching it, and then I came into the Hilgers and the Bioprogressive and the Ricketts and Gugino, and looking at their literature of slower development of the upper arch. And I'm going, there's something here that we can do. And I had no idea about airway at this point. I mean, it wasn't even on my radar. I swear I must have probably missed so many kids that had issues at that age, and I just wasn't even looking at it, had no idea. But I did get that, like, treating the symptom of the crowding really wasn't the thing, and maybe what could I do? So, and it really just happened because these are the kids that just started walking into my door when I first opened my practice and hung my shingle, and I didn't know what else to do with them, and I just did it in good conscience. I'd also, last thing I'll say about that is I treated a lot of patients in my residency. In my 3rd year, when I was co-chief resident, the chief residents got a lot of the cases that had been in treatment for 5 years, and we had to try to clean them up and get them so they could be acceptable. A lot of these cases were 4-by extraction cases that were just a mess. So I knew that pulling teeth wasn't always the answer, because I saw so many cases where it wasn't. And I knew that if I started them down that path at 6, 7, 8 years old, you're kind of pot committed in a lot of these cases. So just kind of started thinking, what else could I do? So did you have a similar sort of epiphany in that, or was yours
Actually,
just
my story is backwards from that.
really?
So yeah, so remember when I started my practice, I had been to a Damon, one of these Damon meetings,
Yep.
and saw these beautiful, just beautiful cases being presented by obviously some excellent orthodontists, and you've probably given them barbed wire and they would make beautiful cases.
Right, paper clips. Yeah. Yep.
And so and doing things non-extraction,
Mhm.
and not just for the sake of being non-extraction, but doing them
Agreed.
beautifully.
Yep.
And I've yet to see someone who's like dying to get their teeth extracted. I've yet to meet anyone.
I'm right there, right there
Again,
with you.
I'm not saying that we never extract. Absolutely,
Agreed.
there's a time and place to extract, and
Agreed.
extractions are not bad. There's absolutely a time and place, so it's never
Yep.
all or
Yep.
nothing. But I'd
Completely
seen
agree.
the most beautiful aesthetic cases that I'd ever seen, and efficient and extremely
Yeah.
efficient.
Yeah.
And 2 things resonated. We have to be efficient.
Yep.
To protect to take care of the patient wants you to be efficient. It's not like they don't want you to be
Of
efficient.
course. Right.
It's
Right.
good for the practice and it's good for the patient.
Yep.
And also just the aesthetic outcomes, the occlusal outcomes, the bites, amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn how to do that. No one taught us. There was no one teaching any passive self-ligation at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And so kind of I headed off to Dr. Pitz's office to learn
Okay.
from him.
So that's how you, okay. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's how I got into it. So I started doing these cases on adults that I, thought were surgical cases. That's what we were taught. You have to do surgery or nothing.
Yep.
So I was like, I can't accept that. I can't help this patient who doesn't want to do surgery. There's got to be a way. Is there a way? So I would, of course, email a bunch of my colleagues, and they were like, oh yeah, here's a similar case. Do this, do this. And so that's how I learned that the alveolus is if you treat it really gently and kindly is somewhat plastic, and
Yes,
you can
very
move it
pliable.
and
Yeah.
change it.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Even in
And so I
adults,
started
let
doing
alone
these
7-year-olds. Yeah.
I started doing this on adults and I started doing it on teenagers,
Mm.
but I hadn't done it on the young kids because the training and the pediatric dentist that I'd worked with earlier in my career would always put in expanders.
Yeah.
So one day, the dentist that I'm working in their office, who I rented the chair from, his little 7-year-old comes in and crowded, and she may have had a crossbite, I can't remember. And I put in a RPE in, and showed him how to use it. Da 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 da. This is this is standard of care for for this.
Yep.
And the next day I get a phone call, and he's like, well, 2 days later, he's like, Rael, get this thing out of my daughter's mouth. And I'm like, why? What's wrong? He's like, she's freaking out every time I come to
Mm-hmm.
turn the expander. She
Yeah.
like jumps up. I have to bring her to the office and put on nitrous and turn the expander, and it's like this whole big endeavor. And I was like, oh, that's weird. It's not an endeavor for anyone else, or maybe no one else told me there was such an endeavor,
Right.
right?
Yep. Yep.
And so I started, he's like, well, why can't you? And so I've been showing, a few of the dentists locally, the things that we were doing with Damon arch development and things like that. He's like, why can't you do that on my daughter?
Huh.
And I said, oh, good question.
Yeah.
Why
Good question.
can't I?
Right.
And so then I reached out, of course, to my crew before I do anything. I reach out, like, I need some information. I need to learn about this. And they were like, oh yeah, we put brackets on primary teeth, and we do this arch development with the wires, and just like we do it on teenagers and just like we do it on adults, and it works. Yep. Guess what? It works even better on younger kids because their jawbones are so malleable.
They're so pliable.
The beauty of it is that it's comfortable because you don't have this thing in the roof of their mouth. Their tongue, when we started talking technically, it's like it encourages tongue posture, because
that's a huge part of it. Which
I think is the biggest part of the stability of that kind of arch development.
Yes.
Because I was taught to always over expand, using expanders.
Yes.
We never overexpand.
Same here. I just was telling a resident this exact thing. That's crazy about the overexpansion. Exactly. I never had to with braces and wires.
Never had to, and we rarely, if ever, see relapse in this kind of expansion. So again, there's no never ever. But we've been doing this arch development, and so in the early days we would put, because we were all Damon, we put Damon brackets on these primary teeth. They start getting loose after a couple appointments, and then you got to take them off. And my thinking is like, wow, we're throwing away these expensive Damon brackets. After like 2 appointments, this is crazy.
That's an expensive handle.
Expensive handle. So then we started putting these little mini second molar tubes on. And then we moved to eyelets, because the eyelets then didn't have, they were round, so they didn't catch any torque from the rectangular wires, which was great, because we were thinking that maybe we were prematurely avulsing primary teeth from just adding too much torque or too much pressure to these teeth, which they had to come out anyway at some point, but we wanted to make sure that things were as normalized as possible. So we went to eyelets, and that's how I developed the Bernie tube, is basically taking the features of the eyelets that we liked and kind of the stuff that we didn't like, and putting it all into a Bernie tube that was really well adapted for bonding primary teeth. And so I tell people we're definitely expanding. We're doing arch development. Do we still use expanders now and again? Absolutely.
Yep.
If there's an absolute critical airway issue, the patients seeing ENTs do sleep studies, and they call for RPE, maxillary rapid expansion, we do it.
Yep.
But making space and getting back to helping patients with form and function and tongue posture. So I kind of backed into it from doing it on adults and teenagers, and then doing it on the young kids.
Hey, Doc Podcast listeners. The biggest compliment you can give us is to share the show with friends and family. That way others can benefit from all the great content Doc has to offer. And now back to today's episode. And I think the consistency there, and as we talked more and realized how similar we are in how we've approached this, but just, again, from opposite ends of the country and now opposite ends of the spectrum of, you came from the adults down and I came from the little ones up, but we both had the commonality there is we both were looking at the way we were taught to do it and the way we thought it needed to happen. And we were open to thinking differently about that, using our knowledge of science and craniofacial growth and development, and understanding the biology, and then saying, well, why can't I push this envelope? And a big part for me too was I would tell people early on when I started doing it, because I did it with going back to the beginning, I was using expanders. I used an upper RPE, a lower Williams. I didn't know at the time, kind of embarrassed to say, that using an RPE in a, I mean, Prophet says it's dangerous, quote unquote, and can cause distortion of the face to use heavy orthopedic forces in kids under the age of 10. I mean, we know the myriad of studies out there that we shouldn't be cranking these things on 7-year-olds twice a day. Why do we do it? Because that's how we learn to do it on 12-year-olds, is what I think. I mean, and I did it. I'm guilty of it. I'm not saying, I'm not indicting anybody. I just, there's no real literature to support going in on a 7-year-old and turning something with that much force, with 3 to 10 pounds of force per turn. So you're talking 6 to 20 pounds of force in a day. You don't need that. But that being said, we do it. We throw expanders in on these kids all the time as orthodontists. So I just started thinking, okay, if Ricketts and them could do it with like 300-400 grams of force with an 036 L-Jaloy like we were talking about, and if Schwartz was using these slowly turned lower expanders, right, maybe I don't need all these heavy forces, and maybe I could generate enough force with braces and wires, because nickel titanium alloys, you get up to a 1622, 1725, you're in the 500, 400 to 600 grams of force that those can deliver. And I always kind of did some quad helixes, or quad helices, as the case would be. And when you get that narrow arch, man, that thing is almost flat with the occlusal plane. It is so hard to get that thing up into the height of the palatal vault, if even impossible. And so I'm like, well, when I use those, and Rick Prophet talked about using an expanded lingual arch instead of a turnkey Hyrax to have lighter force. So what if I just went to the buccal, right? Like, I mean, okay, on a quad helix, we could have the argument of getting above the center resistance of the tooth and up higher to the line of action of force to the center resistance of the maxilla, but we're talking about a 7-year-old. So some of those arguments aren't as valid as far as the resistance of the suture is going to put on it with the maxilla. Secondly, if I'm knowing that a quad helix and all these studies exist that you can get orthopedic change from slow expansion with that type of device, why couldn't I get it from the buccal? And that was kind of how, that was about 5 years in to doing expansion in my practice, 5-6 years in, about 2011, when I just started experimenting with it. And to end that part of the story where I started, I would literally tell patients' parents, don't know if this is going to work. It's not going to hurt anything, but if we can avoid having to put your child in expanders, would you be for that? And I did that probably for the first 6-9 months that I did this. The first patients I did it on were kids who had special needs. The one was a boy with Asperger's, and he could not, there was no way he was going to tolerate expanders with his tongue. And he was had significant oral sensory issues. And mom begged me. She said, Dr. Mike, she's like, please don't send him to get teeth out. And to your point of wanting extractions, she's like, he'll have to go under general anesthesia. And she said, how many times? I said, well, we'd have to go get, the primary C's. I told her, like, baby canines now, then a couple years, maybe a couple more baby teeth. And then for sure, when he's older, 4 premolars. And she's like, so it could be 3 times I'd have to go to the hospital and have him under general anesthesia. He had a lot of complications, times he had been under general. So I looked at this mom and I was just like, she's like, is there anything else you can do? And I said, could you think if I gave him, and I would use just hydroxyzine, Atarax, just a low dose, a little bit at night, little in the morning, and it would take some of these high anxious kids and chill them out. It was great. It's a antihistamine. It's non-narcotic. And so I said, do you think if I give him like a little kind of antihistamine, like a strong Benadryl, he'd be able to go through the process of getting the braces on? Mom's like, yeah, he's good with that stuff. But if it's by his tongue, when later he's going to rip it out. So I did it. I put braces on the kid. And the first visit, he comes back 8 weeks later, and I looked in this kid's mouth and I'm like, what the heck just happened? It defied everything I thought I knew about orthodontics. I mean, the arch was starting to expand. I'm going with an 014 higher. I'm like, yeah. What is, I mean, I literally called my clinicians over. I'm like, you've got to come see this. Now, of course, it's an N of 1. So I wasn't ready to just go all in on every patient. So over the next few years, I just treaded lightly, and I would just I didn't do any posterior crossbites to start. I would just do those narrow upper and lower arches. Then I figured out how to build bite ramps strategically and kind of disocclude them and go after a unilateral crossbite. Then I'd get more bold and went after a bilateral crossbite. And next thing I know, I'm like, wow, I rarely need to put an expander in on these, again, younger kids. There's certain exceptions. And then the last thing I'll say on that part of it is I started doing it on patients with cleft craniofacial anomalies and palatal clefts. And I have a course on the doc platform on that, which shows cases. It changed how cleft craniofacial orthodontics was done on the team I was on, because the surgeons, one of the biggest problems when you talk about expanding these kids in phase one with cleft craniofacial issues is the fistula had open, and then the surgeon wants to go in and do a fistula repair maybe before they do the actual bone grafting. So you're trying to coordinate these surgeries, and you got to take the expander out because they can't operate with the expander on the roof of the mouth, and you're trying to retain them. Well, what do? You give them a Holly, and then they can't wear the Holly after surgery. And so there's this constant collapse. Well, when I would do it braces and wires, I said to the surgeons, the ENT and the pediatric plastic surgeon, I'm like, do you think it's a problem if you operate with the braces on? And they're like, no, if there's nothing on the tongue side, it should be fine. It totally transformed the approach. I mean, they were doing tongue grafts for huge palatal fistulas with this kid in full braces, and I didn't lose any of the transverse. And I mean, I could go on about it, but that just is kind of how it kept evolving for me and why I became so passionate about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that do it this way, or have introduced this process in their practice, have that kind of story of like, hey, I tried it on this one kid because I couldn't do what I was typically doing, and it
Right.
worked so well, and it's probably the same story about other things that they've introduced, right?
Sure. Yep.
Now, again, the big argument, of course, when you talk about airway is, okay, so we're developing the arches, but what about nasal passages, right? What's happening? And so, again, there's so much that goes into airway and breathing with,
Yep.
Tongue posture, mandibular position, pharyngeal length, uvula. I mean, there's just so much nasal airway.
I say turbinate hypertrophy. Yes.
That's all part of it.
Sure. Yep.
Right. And so absolutely we work with the ENTs, and if they insist on sutural expansion, absolutely we want to do it and give our patients everything that we can to help their situations. So but very very seldom do we get a letter and say you have to put in an expander, or a sutural expander from the ENTs, or from the usually when they do the tonsils and adenoids is a huge relief. I'm hoping they're looking at that stuff now, and it's just an educational process to look at the patient as a whole versus just trying to make some teeth straight.
Completely. And getting that history, because I would have so many parents who, on the history, they would have adenoidectomy and or tonsillectomy. And one was dad was a physician. He was a very well-known physician in my community. And his daughter had her adenoids, and on top of my head, I don't know if tonsils as well, but for sure her adenoids removed. She was snoring. And dad said she was pretty good for a few months. She was doing better. And lately she's been getting worse. And I've taken her back to the ENT, and they scoped her, and they said there's really not much adenoid regrowth, maybe a little bit, but certainly not worth another surgical procedure. And we just can't figure this out. Well, this only came about after I had her cone beam, and I looked at her and I saw how narrow she was in the nasopharyngeal area, not even just due to her adenoids per se, but just really tight in that area, and a little bit of turbinate hypertrophy, and looking at the clinical, to your point, signs and symptoms that she came in with. And she had these dark circles under her eyes and these narrow arches and not enough space for her tongue. So I said to dad, again, because I never said to anybody that if I go in and do this, I'm going to solve the snoring. What I said to dad is she presents with narrow arches, lack of tongue space, some constriction in the nasal passageways and pharynx. I have to defer to my medical colleagues on, what's going on up in the nasal passageways and pharyngeal area. But my area of expertise is in her mouth, and she's very narrow, and her tongue doesn't have a lot of room. And because of that, that tongue can be pushed posteriorly, especially when she's lying supine at night in bed, and it can occlude the airway. We know that. That's one of the etiological factors of snoring. It's why we give adults devices and appliances to bring their tongue forward, away from the oropharyngeal area at night. So we know that that's a contributing factor, or can be. So I said, I'm going to go in, I'm going to help develop her arches so they're the normal width. We're going to use braces and wires to do it, and take a little over a year. because we had to wait for her laterals too because they were blocked out. Said, we'll go in, we'll do this. She'll have, I can promise that she's going to have a successful result as far as being able to develop those arches. I don't know the impact that will have on her snoring. However, I've had multiple patients present just like her who had a history of adenoid and or tonsillectomy. I went and made room for the tongue, which also, again, has a nice benefit of making room for the teeth, and it resolved. So we'll see. And we'll give it a shot and we'll see how it goes. And if what I do doesn't work, well, we're just going to have to keep following up with ENT and allergy and maybe get a sleep physician involved and figure out what's going on. Dad's like, all right, I'm all in. Well, within 4 to 5 months, Dad's like, he comes back into the clinic. He's like, he's like, I don't even believe this. He's like, she's not snoring. She's not snoring anymore. He's like, I check her multiple nights. He's like, I can't even believe this. And so, you know what his question to me was? Why isn't every orthodontist looking at patients like this? And he said, we had been for another opinion and they didn't recommend we did anything right. And they said she was probably going to need teeth removed. And so I think so often we get in this debate of extraction and non-extraction, and it has nothing directly to do with that. It was that I took the time to look at this girl for more than her teeth, didn't overpromise, and just to normalize the development that she was deficient in. I treated a problem so that this girl was able to have room for her tongue, and in her case, it helped her.
Right. I mean, what you did is what we teach our residents is listen first, right? We're all quick to tell, patients what's going to solve the problem, but we should always do more listening, right? And try and figure out, where's this coming from and what else is going on, so that we can kind of delve into things, a little bit deeper for them. I think that's better patient care.
Agreed.
For sure. In whatever technique you use, a lot of the stuff is universal.
Completely.
A lot of this stuff is universal, right?
Yep.
So absolutely. And so, try and do more listening. The patients will tell you what's going on,
Why do you think the negative stigma towards those of us who do treat early, especially, dare I say, right, with full braces and wires on 7-year-old patients, 6-7-year-old patients, and then looking at and being conscious of the implications on airway? Why do you think our profession is still so resistant to that?
I think there's a couple of things. I think there's a misconception, or however you want to portray it, that early treatment is not productive. So I think so some people will not do it because frankly, they can't charge enough for it. And there's a lot of follow-up and a lot of visits. I think some people just don't like seeing young kids that just have a hard time relating and
I agree.
And working in these small mouths and they have a difficult time. So I think that's just a personal preference sometimes, which kind of weird, but okay. And then I think sometimes, especially with braces and wires, what I've heard is like, well, you're going to make the teeth straight as well. And what if they don't need a second phase?
Yes.
And I'm like,
oh, that comment.
What on earth are you talking about?
Makes
I'm like,
blood pressure.
That's the best thing that ever happens if they don't need a second phase.
So did you see what I saw that these kids had a tremendous psychosocial benefit that I never anticipated was important for an 8-year-old kid? Huge, right?
Huge. For me, that's the number one reason, to give them a nice smile sooner.
Oh my gosh.
It's brutal what's happening with our children these days. And it's happening at a younger and younger and younger age.
Yes.
Specifically with social media. When I was at school and, someone had said something about my teeth or was mean to me or this or that, I could go home and go home for the weekend or go home at night, not have to deal with it until I saw that kid again.
Right.
And nowadays the kids can't get away from this stuff at all, 24/7. And it's horrific. So if nothing else, if it's just for psychosocial reasons,
right,
to get the I put braces on a young girl the other day, and just the fact that she got braces, day one, nothing had changed. There's no movement yet, but she actually had braces. Her head posture changed.
Yes.
Her demeanor changed.
Yes.
And I promise you, she's going to school the next day like the queen of the school, because now she's got braces and no one's going to make fun of her anymore for her teeth. And that's the power. That's what we have to do for our patients. And it's enormous. And we get caught up in all the other stuff.
Yes.
And it's so important. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Did you ever have the one where they don't tell you there's any psychosocial problem?
Uh-huh.
And then midway through or at the end of treatment, the parent
Yeah,
says, she came and be like, Dr. Mike, she came to me and she told me that she was being teased really badly by this one boy. And I wondered why she was hating going to school. I had this multiple times, or a boy, why he was hating going to school. They were being teased and they weren't telling their parent why. They just said, I don't
correct.
like school. And
Yeah,
all of a sudden, since their teeth got straight, that changed. And he or she loves school now. I mean, I look at colleagues and I'm like, what is your argument against that? Even like you said, take the airway, the transfer, like
yeah.
even if you just focused on making these kids, why do we settle for the fact? And again, you have to be upfront with the parents, and I always was. Like, this might not solve everything, and we very likely are going to need to go back in when they're an adolescent. But these are the benefits of doing this now, and here's the risk and consequences if we don't. And again, they might be a two-faced patient. Some people, you flat out knew they were going to be a two-faced patient, and I would always make that very clear.
Yeah.
But why? Absent, I think you gave excellent reasons. Just kind of fear of treating in unfamiliarity of treating these younger kiddos, not liking to do that, and then profitability. People turn to people who are doing a lot of phase one and are like, "Oh, you're just doing it to make more money." If you don't really understand how to do phase one correctly, you're going to take a bath on it. And ask me how I know, because when I was doing upper and lower turnkey expanders and 2x4s, I was literally probably paying them to do it. By the time you count, I have in my one course, I showed the breakdown of the number of visits. I went into old charts and literally took like 50 people and pulled the average number of visits and then compared it to what I do with braces and wires. It's like four
Mm-hmm.
times the number
Yep.
of clinical appointments and chair time, which is also, as you alluded to before, really nice to be so sensitive to our parents, that they don't have to be bringing the kids to our office as frequently. But I just
Yeah,
don't
we
under.
forget that it's not about us in our
Right,
practices.
right.
Really, it's about the patient and it's
Yeah,
about their family and
yeah.
what patients have to do to get to an appointment, and parents have to take off work or take a kid
Yes.
to daycare and come here and go there. And it's an endeavor. I know with getting my kids to doctor's appointments as well.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
not just, oh yeah, you just, I'm sitting here and you come see me. So
Right.
we've got to be respectful of time,
Yeah.
right? It's super, super important. People ask me again that initial question, how did your practice grow and what did you do? And I said, you got to respect people's time. You got to
Yes.
get to the appointments on time. Don't make them wait for
Yep.
hours and hours.
Agreed. Always my
Finish your
philosophy.
treatment on time. Don't
Yes.
take treatment
Yep.
forever and ever and ever. No one
Yep.
likes it.
Yep.
And figure out an efficient way to do this. But you're right. The phase one stuff, and again, at least if the parents say no, we don't want to do that, that's okay too. But at least give the information. And our job, I always tell them, is for me to help them make an informed decision.
Exactly.
And oftentimes they'll turn around and say, okay, what would you do? And I said, well,
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you what I would do on my kid every single time. That's
Right.
my moral compass. Like,
Yep.
this is the treatment plan. If
Same.
this was my child, which I think we should all do,
Yep.
is that's the treatment plan. And so I usually not wishy-washy unless there are options. I think in my experience, in my hands, in our practice, this is what I would do.
Yep.
But I think a lot of times then, parents are, oh, I'm paying for braces twice, and it's our job to educate,
Mhm.
to educate and inform,
Yes.
and that's okay. And luckily these days we can treat at any age pretty much. But
Mhm.
I do think I see such good impact and good results on these phase ones. And again, not every kid, most kids don't need phase one.
Agreed. Agreed. You don't. I mean, I had a
Actually,
huge.
most kids that come
Yes.
in, we say, let's watch for a while, see what
Agreed. Same with
happens.
me. Yep.
It's the funniest thing because I'm like the phase one guy
Yep.
and
Me
probably
too.
do the least phase one out of
That's
everyone.
so funny you said that, because again, a similarity between us. I found the same exact thing. People came to me and they're like, I could have sworn you were going to tell us we needed braces. And I was like, no,
No,
you don't.
no,
If
it's
there's
okay to
nothing
not
wrong here.
need
It's
braces.
okay
It's
to
totally
not
fine.
need braces. And I don't know if you found this, but I found once I switched, because I did it for about 6 years with expanders. And then when I went to the braces and wires and did that for almost about 12 to 13, the difference in how those cases, as you alluded to, are retained, but in how much less work I needed to do if they needed a phase two, and how many more of them didn't need a phase
Mm-hmm.
two.
Yeah,
And what a wonderful service to provide to the families to say, oh, all their 12-year-old molars are in. We're just going to make a set of final retainers to wear to bed, and your child's
you're good.
fine. And
Yep.
and I mean, so many people were just like, oh my gosh, this is the best news ever. And for those people in our profession who say, well, yeah, that's why you don't get their teeth too straight in phase one, which I now know but drives both of us
Or you
nuts.
don't retain phase one.
Just, or
I've seen people
I've
are
had
like,
people,
oh, we
yes.
don't
Oh,
retain phase one. I'm
yep,
like,
I know
they
that one.
do.
Yep.
Or I've seen fixed retainers for phase one, like the upper two to two that
Yeah.
or lower, but nothing on the arch
Yeah.
development and holding leeway space or whatever. And I was like, what's going on here? Like, how come I'm seeing these?
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of to try and guarantee a phase two, which
I think so. I hate to say
crazy.
that, but I think so. And my
Yeah,
attitude and what I say to them is learn how to charge appropriately for phase one and do it more efficiently.
true.
Just instead of hating on all of phase one and mocking those who do it and saying that they're like over treating or overcharging, just start to figure out, expand your mind as we both
Yeah,
did. We weren't trained in this. We just kind of, no pun intended, expanded our minds and said, what else could we do with these patients? And like I said, I was losing a ton of money doing it, but that didn't make me say, I'm going to stop doing phase one. I just started to figure out I've got to figure out a more efficient way to do this because this is the right thing to do for these patients developing their arches young. And I'm not being successful. And you can't just keep charging an unlimited amount for what I was doing to cover my inefficiencies. So I was like, this is kind of tough. And I can see where people would say, phase one is highly inefficient and not profitable. So we're just going to get through it and then try to recoup in phase two. And I've heard people say that all the time. And when I switched my mindset and I got more efficient on phase one and did more in phase one and charged appropriately for phase one,
yeah.
you're not even thinking about it. I was happy if they didn't need a phase two because I got to deliver that news to them. It was usually
Isn't it great
in the
when you
clinic and
walk into a consultation and
yeah,
everyone's holding their breath to
yeah,
kind of hear what you have to
yeah.
say?
And you're like,
The parents know that, hey, the teeth look really
they
good.
do. Yep.
They're not occlusion experts or anything else, but they're like, wow, everything looks really, really good. Or,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of maybe a millimeter of crowding on a low
Yep.
end or whatever. And they're looking and they're looking and looking. And I was like, wow, hey, it's nice to see you. Look at this beautiful smile. It looks amazing. If you want to straighten that one tiny little tooth over there, no problem. We can do that. But
Yep.
it's an option. You don't really have to do anything. Everything looks great. The occlusion looks great.
Yep.
And everyone like,
Yeah,
like
you literally
just
you feel
the
the
pressure just to okay,
yeah,
wow,
yeah.
we can do braces on our other kid now.
And
Type of
so
thing,
many said I was waiting to
it's like
bring,
there's
Joey.
plenty.
But yes, I was waiting to bring him because I didn't
Yeah,
think we
we
couldn't
didn't
afford to
know
do
about
both.
phase two
Yes.
on the
Oh my
older
gosh.
one,
Oh, we could tell
and that's
stories on
okay.
this all day.
And
But
so I've
yeah,
seen, you have no idea. Well, I've been doing this a long time, but I've seen so many young adults come back to our practice, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I was supposed to get phase two, but my parents, had my brother do
yep,
braces, and this tooth bugs me."
yep,
I'm like, all
yep,
right,
yep.
you want braces for 3 months or 4 months?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Whatever for the one tooth that bugs you.
yep,
Do some aligners, whatever you want.
yep.
Because something's bugging them, but so many that I just thought maybe just went away and fell out of our obs.
Right, right.
There's so many more than don't come in just because they're like everything looks good.
Everything looks good. Yeah,
Leave
they're
me
just
alone. Stop calling me, type
yeah.
of
Their
thing.
parents won't even bring them in for that
Yeah,
follow up.
you
Yeah,
won't see it,
exactly. Because they're like,
which is
yeah,
fine
yeah,
too, as long as
yeah.
they're
I
doing
agree.
okay.
Yeah,
As long as everyone's doing okay, which is the goal here, is for your patients to thrive, right?
yeah. And a lot of them say like the kids are like, I love my smile. Like they don't care that there's a
Yeah,
little rotation on the lower right
yeah,
three.
and
They're
that's
like,
fine
and
too.
I'm like, it's fine. You're fine.
It's fine.
And I tell
No
them if that
one,
ever
yeah,
drives you nuts, you give us a call, or if
yeah,
it's 10 years from now and you've moved to a different location or wherever,
that's
find an
fine.
orthodontist, you can get it fixed.
Yeah,
It's not a big deal. Like just wear your retainers every night because in time things will move if you don't. But just as long as you do that, you're fine. And it's really no, it's
yeah,
fun. It's fun to
yeah.
do. So
No, the early treatment is definitely rewarding, and I think we can have a big impact on these young lives. And so we kind of make this a family thing. We're all going to do this together,
mhm,
and we're going to have mom actually brush your teeth at night, just like when you were a little baby. You remember
right,
she used to read your story.
right.
Now we're going
Yeah.
to read your story and
Yeah,
brush your
great
teeth,
patient management, right? And
and the
bringing them all,
parents
which you
love
can't.
that.
Good luck doing that on a 14-year-old boy.
No, no, you can't. Yeah,
Come on,
good luck
you
getting a
know?
response from some 14-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
When you
So
say hi, So, but there definitely nuances to
yes,
treatment.
yes,
There's
good point.
nuances
Well,
to
good word
dealing
for
with
it.
primary
Yes.
teeth
Yep. Not
that
necessarily
start getting
obstacles, but
loose.
nuances. Yes. Great point.
Yeah,
Yep.
but to understand the nuances and have a plan to overcome them
Yep.
before they happen, and then
Yep.
and then and then deal with them. It's not a big deal.
Yep. Agreed.
And so the part of the reason why I designed this Bernie tube was because of some of these things. Trying to remove an eyelet off a loose baby tooth was excruciating for a patient. And
Yeah.
then I got to figure out a way so we can get these off without pressure on the teeth. And so we built stuff into that bracket so that it worked well for this type of patient.
Yeah, no, that's true. And yeah. Again, it's like we all existing in many miles apart. I kind of developed my own prescription for how I wanted to do this. And it's the same concept. Once you figure it out and and that's a lot of what I try to teach in my courses is once you figure this out, I mean, it is more complicated than just going and throwing a bunch of braces on the next 7-year-old you see, which is kind of what you and I had to do to figure it out. But I made a lot of mistakes along the way that if I can save somebody, and same like with you, with the Bernie tube, something that just will make their life a little easier, more predictable, then, I really had honed it in after a little while, but learn from our mistakes and what we did.
And go visit practices.
Yes. Great point. Go see places. Yes. Ask questions.
Go see places.
I never turned down a dental resident or an ortho resident who wanted to come to my practice.
Yeah. Go visit. Yeah.
Yep. That's awesome. So, well, thanks so much and really appreciate it. I appreciate your time and good luck to your Niners as well.
Well, thanks, Mike.
It pains me to say that, but
I'm so happy I came about your podcast because, I love listening to all of them and they're all fantastic. So a pleasure and an honor to be on here with you today. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. I really appreciate it, Rael, and we'll talk soon.
We'll talk soon. Cheers.
Right, take care, bud. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of the Doc Podcast. Be sure to visit theorthocoach.com to get access to ADA CERP recognized CE courses or to schedule a private one-on-one coaching session with me. And remember to join the Doc community on Facebook for more great content designed to help you succeed both personally and professionally. Just go to Facebook, search for the Doc community, and request admission into the group. You can also find Doc on Instagram at @theorthocoach. And always remember, you have been blessed with the ability to do amazing things.